Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is an English version of a talk I gave on how to counter atheism recently. The talk actually doesn't refer to atheism and arguments for atheism and counter arguments for the existence of God. Rather, it refers to the roots of the problem which come from the dominance of Western education, which is built on foundations of rejection of religion and God and the unseen. Why are atheistic thoughts spreading throughout the world and influencing the Muslim youth? The reasons are complex, but one of the important ones is that colonization of the globe by Europe led to colonization of minds and created extreme awe and reverence for the West and Western intellectual traditions. This respect continues to be created by Western educational systems which are now rapidly spreading throughout the world, and the Muslim youth, which is trained in these Western intellectual traditions, also learns to believe that religion is an obsolete superstition and based on ignorance, which is what the West learned about their own religion. So this kind of atheism and rejection of religion is built into a Western education. And that is the real source and reason for the spread of atheism today. So at the heart of modern atheism is the social sciences which are taught today all over the world, economics, politics, and other branches. Basically, social science is preaching of the European way of life. And because of the spectacular technological achievements of the West, we have all got an enormous amount of respect for Western knowledge because we see the effects of it at our fingertips. The computer and the car and the rockets and all of the technological achievements impact our lives immediately. So because of this respect, we assume that the social sciences are equally powerful. However, this is not true. The idea that social science is a science is a deception. So one has to critically differentiate between physical science and social science, and to understand the very toxic moral foundations on which Western social science is built in order to be able to counter the rising tide of atheism today. My own perspective on this matter is very unusual, and so it might be helpful if I go through a little bit of my life experience which led me to have these views. And basically, I came into contact with the belief, and from this contact I learned that the faith is of the heart is very different from rational understanding of religion. The mind works by logic, but the heart reaches out to God. So in the course of the tabligh, I understood that having faith in God is very difficult. It doesn't occur by logic, because we see that the fire burns and we don't see the hand of God. And so our life experiences teaches us that fire burns, water drowns, food gives us sustenance, and God is nowhere in the picture. So Iman requires inserting this unseen God into the picture and saying the fire burns, but only because Allah Ta'ala allows it and permits it. And the food gives me sustenance only because Allah Ta'ala puts this power into the food. And the water drowns only by the order of Allah. So saying this and saying the fire cannot burn if Allah Ta'ala does not want it to, this requires actually overcoming a lifetime of training and experience which tells us the opposite, that fire burns regardless of God having anything to say in this matter. So that's why acquiring deep faith in God is difficult and requires practice. After the experience of the Tabligh, by the grace of Allah, I acquired this faith, and then this led me to a great puzzle, because Allah Ta'ala in the Quran promises that the believers will be led to the Nur and the unbelievers will be led to darkness. But my eyes showed me the opposite. My training and experience showed me that all of the powerful and useful and important knowledge, which is what Allah Ta'ala uses the word Nur for, is in the hands of the unbelievers. And the believers are trapped in ignorance and darkness. So it seems like what the Quran is saying is the opposite of what the eyes are showing me. So Iman means believing in the Quran and rejecting the evidence of my eyes. And I did that. My experience with Tabligh gave me the confidence that what Allah Ta'ala says is true, and what my weak aql and what weak senses show me is false. But I could not understand it, and so I made a lot of dua to Allah Ta'ala to explain this matter to me, to show me how the knowledge that is really valuable is in the Quran and not what is being taught in the universities to students all over the world. So history testifies to the effectiveness of the knowledge that was revealed to mankind via our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran changed the course of history, and the Prophet is counted as one of the most influential people in the world. But today it seems that this Quranic knowledge has lost all its power, because even the Muslims are not able to use this knowledge to change their own conditions. The Quran teaches us that this is the most powerful and important message, the final message of God to mankind, which is the complete and perfect gift sufficient for our guidance, and that Islam enlightened the world 1400 years ago. But when we get a Western education, we are taught that history begins in 1600, when the West got enlightened and they got this knowledge. From this knowledge, with this, they created science and technology and democracy and political science and all sorts of every good knowledge that is known today was developed by the West in the last 3 centuries. These two stories are in dramatic conflict with each other. Is the important knowledge the one that was given by Allah Ta'ala to our Prophet 1400 years ago? Or is the important body of knowledge the one that was created by the West in the past 3 centuries? The problem we face today as an ummah is very similar to a problem faced a long time ago by the ancient Mu'tazila. When the Muslims first encountered the depth and sophistication and complexity of Greek teachings, they were very impressed. They were very simple Bedouin coming from the desert, and they were not used to this kind of intellectual complexity and depth. And so one faction of the Muslims, the Mu'tazila, argued that logic is equivalent to the Quran in terms of its solidity and validity. By logic, they meant Greek philosophy, and they wanted to argue that Greek philosophy should be accepted on par with the Quranic teachings. And this became actually the state religion in Islam for a while, but then Allah Ta'ala protected His religion, and this view was rejected. And we can see why, because today all of the things that the Mu'tazila considered to be on par with the Wahi have been proven wrong, and Greek philosophy has led to very results which are now known to be wrong. So the modern Mu'tazila are in a similar position. They are extremely impressed by Western education and Western knowledge, and they don't argue, but they actually act as if this is on par with the Wahi. And this situation was created by colonization of the globe by Europe. In early 20th century, European powers controlled about 90% of the Islamic world. And colonization is primarily the conquest of minds. A handful of people cannot rule millions of people against their will. And this will is created by education, an education which teaches the people to believe that they are inferior and the West and the white people are superior. And once you start believing this, then you accept all things Western as superior to all things that come from your own heritage. And the most brainwashed people were what I call the coconut class, brown on the outside and white on the inside. These are the people that came into power after the whites left, and they have continued this system of education which creates the same type of thinking today. A brief detour into history will help understand this better. World War II was a war among the European powers which sapped their power, and this is what allowed freedom struggles to succeed and ended the colonization era. In the Islamic world, the struggles for freedom were based on an ideology, the idea that Islam gave us economic, political and social systems which were far superior to anything which the West had to offer. But after the revolution, this system was not implemented anywhere in the Islamic world. Why? Because the coconut class, which had held power under the influence of the colonizers, became the rulers after independence, and they continued the same Western policies and the same Western education systems and the same Western political, economic and social structures. As a result, the real Islamic revolution never happened. And sometime later, the second generation of Islamic economists decided that this revolution is never going to happen. So instead of creating a revolutionary new basis for society, we will just take the Western ideas and modify them to match Islamic principles. So this second methodology, the second generation methodology, is currently in operation all over the Islamic world, and this has led to a crisis in Islamic economics because Western ideas about economics are completely incompatible with Islamic ideas. So the two ways cannot be merged, and we cannot modify Western teachings to match Islamic ideas. So the first generation was revolutionaries who believed in Islamic systems, but the second generation were not revolutionaries at all. They wanted to modify Western systems to conform with Islam. So this is what it means to be Sharia compatible. Instead of creating Sharia based institutions, they want to take existing Western institutions and modify them to match Islamic ideas. Now the second generation had to, in order to modify Western institutions, they had to understand them, and this required acquiring a Western education. But getting a Western education automatically produced colonization of minds and belief in the superiority of the West and the inferiority of the East. As a result, the modern Mu'tazila became extremely impressed with Western knowledge and said that Western knowledge is true. If it doesn't match the Quran and the Hadith, then we will modify the Quran and Hadith to bring the two into conformity, instead of changing Western ideas. So today the central problem of the Ummah is shock and awe of Western knowledge. And to counter this problem, we need to understand the basis of the false claims that are made by Western knowledge. So in particular, one of the key and central ideas is that West redefined the meaning of knowledge itself. In Islam, knowledge is about knowledge about how to become a human being, how to move on our journey to God, how to make the best use of this limited amount of life. Instead, Western knowledge is about knowledge about how to obtain pleasure and power and profits, how to maximize our benefits in this worldly life. And so West takes the idea that the goal of our life is to acquire money and power for granted without any discussion. So this is built into, and so the knowledge is also designed to achieve this goal. The Western knowledge cannot teach us how to become better human beings. To give an example of how shock and awe of Western knowledge has distorted development of Islamic alternatives, we can take the example of Islamic economics and finance. Here, Western theories and Western institutions like banks and micro and macro are taken for granted, and then we try to modify them and adjust them to match Islamic ideals. Instead, what needs to be done is to think that if something is not matching the Quran, then it is wrong, and we just reject it, and we rebuild the stock of knowledge on Islamic foundations. And this deeper and more difficult and radical and revolutionary effort is not being done. Instead, to understand why modern Western knowledge is built on wrong foundations, we need to study something about the history of Europe. In particular, the Europeans rejected their own religion, Christianity, and then they sought to rebuild knowledge without religion. So they said that our knowledge is built on rational foundations, based purely on logic and observations. But in fact, no human knowledge can be built without moral foundations. And after rejection of religion, the West adopted very toxic moral foundations on which to build their stock of secular knowledge. Basically, what we call social science should be called European or Eurocentric or Western social science, and it is a prescription for how we should lead our lives as individuals, as communities, as societies. And this is based on Western and European ideas, and this is actually a religion. This is the religion which replaced Christianity in Europe. But this is not understood because social science is presented as being an objective and scientific knowledge about the external reality, and not as a set of rules about how we should construct, how we should build society. The fact that social science is a religion and not science is so obvious that it's hard to understand how such bright thinkers in the West think otherwise. Actually, many of them have arrived at this conclusion, but this is a minority experience, and the majority view still thinks of social science as a scientific objective knowledge about the real world. And the reason for this is that in the West, after rejecting religion, they suffered from trauma of loss of faith, and they said, okay, everybody used to believe in Christianity and this was proven wrong, so now we cannot trust anything. And so we need to build the stock of knowledge from scratch, from zero, on solid foundations. And they said that the only solid foundations are what we can see and what we can touch and what we can reason. So senses and logic. Now, long time ago, 1,000 years ago, Imam Al-Ghazali came to the same position. He was trying to find his way to the truth when there were many different schools of thought. And he came to the realization that senses and logic will not suffice. They are not enough to lead us to the truth, because senses can deceive us and logic can be in error. So he had a spiritual experience where his heart was illuminated with nur from Allah, and he said, this is the only way to get to the truth. Now, unfortunately, even though the West read these books of Ghazali, they could not understand this part, and so they also came to the same position, but they said that we are going to build our entire stock of knowledge on the basis of observations and logic. And this is a task which cannot be done and was already seen as being impossible by Imam Al-Ghazali 1,000 years ago. But the entire structure of Western knowledge is built on this idea that we can build knowledge based on senses and logic alone, even though this is not true, and even though this was realized by Imam Al-Ghazali 1,000 years ago. René Descartes, known as the father of Western philosophy, starts at the same place as Al-Ghazali. And in his book called First Meditations, he says that suppose we are in doubt about everything, how can we proceed? How can we get to certain knowledge? So he starts with this famous, I think, therefore I am. And once he is convinced of his own existence, then he argues for the existence of God using Ilmul Kalam arguments borrowed from the Muslims. But there is this whole logical basis is deeply flawed, because Descartes rejects logic and senses, and then again he starts using logic in order to argue for his own existence, and then for the existence of God, and then for trusting in the senses because God is not a deceiver. So because God created us and created the senses, so we can trust these senses to lead to the right conclusions. Now, so the key difference between Imam Al-Ghazali and René Descartes, the father of Western philosophy, comes with respect to the heart. Imam Al-Ghazali says that our heart and the illumination of the heart by the Nur of Allah is the source for all knowledge, but Descartes makes the mind and logic the basis for all knowledge. And this rejection of the heart is the crucial defect at the center of Western knowledge. All of modern Western knowledge is based on the assumption that all knowledge can be derived from senses, from our observations, and from logic. It excludes the feelings that we have and which are not observable. This foundation is wrong, but this philosophy of logical positivism, which says that all knowledge is built on logic and senses, created the foundations for social sciences in the early 20th century. And this philosophy has had deadly consequences because basically it rejects morality as nonsense. That's because you cannot use observations and logic to derive the moral proposition that it is wrong to tell lies, it is wrong to murder people, and so on. So the social science that results is built on the deadly foundation that there is no morality, and basically this means you have a license to do anything you like based only on its consequences and without regards for whether it is inherently good or bad. You can murder people if this leads to a good outcome for you. You don't have to consider whether murdering innocents is wrong or right. So logical positivism says that we should reject unobservables, and so our own feelings are unobservable. And so before the early 20th century, economics was concerned with the idea of how economic goods can provide welfare to the people. But in early 20th century, Lionel Robbins redefined the basis of economics to be scarcity, and he said that we only need to look at whether people want things and whether they can get them. And we don't need to differentiate between needs and wants. And we don't need to look at how economic goods provide satisfaction to the people. So this is directly contrary to Islamic teachings, because Islam teaches us to fulfill our basic needs, but not to pursue idle desires. Whereas economics teaches that we should pursue all our desires, and there's no difference between needs and wants and idle desires. The fact is that Islam teaches us that true richness is the contentment of the heart, and no matter how many mountains of gold we get, we will keep wanting more. And this is exactly what has happened in the blind pursuit for growth and wealth, that the wealth has multiplied in the West, but contentment and satisfaction has not increased. And this has been researched and found out recently, and the name to this phenomena is the Easterlin Paradox. That even though wealth has multiplied enormously, human satisfaction and human welfare has not increased, and that really contradicts the foundations of economics. And that's why, even though this research has been done and conducted and accepted as valid, economists have not accepted it, and economic theory has no mention of the Easterlin Paradox. The economic theory that we learn is a religion, it is not a knowledge. And it starts by the position that there is no God, afterlife, or judgment. And from this it concludes that rational behavior is to maximize our pleasure in this world, and that too pleasure only from goods and services, and not social pleasures, not pleasure which is in the heart, but the pleasure which is in the mouth, which you can taste. This religion was actually created to justify the brutal policies of colonization, which took wealth away from the whole world and concentrated this in the hearts of, in the hands of Europeans. The problem is that Western education today is spreading this deadly religion all over the world. Today, the central battleground which faces us Muslims today is the intellectual battleground, where the modern Mu'tazila are claiming that the Western knowledge is equivalent or even superior to the Quran, and we have to counter this by showing that the Quran provides us with complete and perfect guidance for our modern times today. Today, when we look to the social problems in Islamic societies, we look to Western knowledge for solutions instead of the Quran. Now, the challenge which faces us is that this is just a claim, and we need to prove this claim by showing how the Quran provides solutions to our modern problems. One example we can give is of Islamic business. The West teaches in MBA programs all over the world that we should provide service to mankind so that we can make money. Islam teaches us the opposite lesson, that we should run a business and make profits so that the money can be used to provide service. So the goal of the business and the profits is to provide service to mankind. Making money is not prohibited in Islam, but it cannot be the goal of our lives to make money. In fact, the goal to serve the creation of God is one of the highest goals, and those people who follow this goal for the sake of the love of Allah will be granted high positions next to the Siddiqeen and the Salihin and the Shuhada and the Anbiya. But this is when you do trade with an Islamic spirit, not with a Western MBA. So today, even the theory of this is not available, and the practice is not available anywhere, but we have small islands of thinkers and actors who are actually trying to implement such Islamic models in the world, but they are very small in number and not very influential today. But this is what needs to be done on a large scale. To see why we need to develop a new economic theory, completely rejecting the Western theory, we note that Western theory rejects God, afterlife and judgment, and therefore it naturally leads to selfishness and greed and hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, and individualism. Why should I care about others? I have only my own life to live. And freedom, I should be free to do whatever I want in this limited life because there is nothing to follow. Islamic society is built on the opposite concepts of generosity, of contentment with what you have instead of seeking more and more, of sacrificing for others, social responsibility, taking care of the weak, the orphans, the poor. And instead of freedom, we are all slaves to the orders of Allah. Abdullah is the highest name. So the Islamic approach to economics is built on entirely different foundations. Obviously, there is no possible compromise between Western economics and Islamic ideas. The intellectual battle which faces us is because of the grand deception of the social sciences. Today, Muslims all over the world take social sciences to be equally valid as physical sciences, and they do not realize this is now the dominant religion of mankind, and this religion is opposed to the Islamic religion. And so basically the intellectual battle is to show that social science is a toxic religion, and Islam offers us a much better way to think about our politics and economics and social institutions, and it provides a superior alternative. But even our religious scholars have not entered this battlefield. Today the social sciences are taught entirely in Western format, and even courses in business ethics, where Islam has a lot to offer, are being taught using Western textbooks all over the Islamic world. So we don't have, even in our own heartlands, even on our home grounds, how to build society. We have not constructed our own Sharia as an alternative to the Western Sharia of the social sciences. The task of opposing modern Western social science is not difficult. Many Western scholars have recognized the toxic moral foundations of Western social sciences. In particular, there is an article about how economic theories damages our morals, and it says that human beings are inclined to be good. Our fitra is good, kind, generous, compassionate, but economic theory teaches us to be selfish and to pursue greed and to be opportunistic and to cause damage to others for our personal benefit, and thereby basically teaches us toxic morals. So social sciences is teaching deadly lessons all over the world to our Muslim youth especially, but because people fail to recognize it as a religion, Islamic scholars have not been able to create a viable alternative. And this is the need of the times, that we need to create a viable alternative to the Western structures of knowledge, and also to show the demonstration of this theory in application. We are saying that Islam is a deen, a complete way of life, but the central problem is that we have no functional living models. If we look at Islamic societies all over the world, our governance systems, our politics, our economics, our education, our social welfare systems, and social institutions are all following Western models. There are no genuine Islamic societies in existence, and we cannot build modern models based on imitating our elders. We have to creatively update. We have to use the principles of the Sharia to build viable models in economics, politics, education, social welfare, and governance, which will work for today. This is not a matter of looking up ahadith in Bukhari. It is a matter of taking this stock of knowledge and using it to creatively discover new ways of living in the modern world. This is a radical alternative which involves developing the theory and the practice and the institutions for society, and this must be worked. We must demonstrate the superiority not just by writing books but by showing that they work in practice. Today, Western education prevents us from doing this work because it says that religion is just a system of belief, a private system of belief, and this is what our youth is being taught. In the meanwhile, deen, or the way of life, is going to be dictated by social science. So this is something which we need to fight. We can say that no, social science is your deen, but our deen is Islam. And then we have to actually enter the debate. And the problem is that European intellectuals created a language which pretends to be objective and value-free. So it pretends to be a science. That's what the word science and social science claims. But this is a false claim, and it is a deception. And it is a very bold idea for Islamic world to challenge the intellectual dominance of the West. To say that you are saying this is a science, but this is not a science. This is a fraud. This is a religion posing as a science. This is the courage that is needed today to challenge the intellectual superiority of the West. As Allah Ta'ala says that Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati, that the gift of the deen given to us is the greatest gift given by God to mankind. And this is the treasure which teaches us all how to live as individuals, as families, as communities, as societies. And this is far, far superior to anything that the West has to offer. But today we have not entered the field, and we are letting our societies be governed by alien religion, and we have not provided an alternative, neither the theory for building an alternative, nor a practical demonstration of this alternative. The central flaw in the Western body of knowledge, physics, chemistry, biology, is that it doesn't teach people how to become human beings. It doesn't teach us how we can live our lives. It doesn't teach us how to behave to our family members. It doesn't teach us how to build neighborhoods which are built on warmth and compassion and caring for each other. It doesn't teach us how to build societies. But although our Quran contains this knowledge, we have not absorbed this knowledge and we have not implemented it in our lives. And so these are just empty and hollow claims. We can end this with a dua that, oh Allah Ta'ala, please guide us out of the darkness into the light and give us the nur of your wisdom and use us to enlighten our lives and enable us to build our societies in the manner that is pleasing to you, and to counter this tide of Western intellectual dominance which has gripped the world and put us all in darkness. May Allah Ta'ala accept.